Okay, the recording has started, and so will we. Good evening. We're so glad you joined us for Loving Our Wild Backyard. How can we save the mini American Serengeti with Todd Wilkinson and our great panel of experts tonight. I am so thrilled that Todd came to me last summer, actually, and had this idea for this talk because for many, many years, actually, I'd been really concerned about this whole issue. And it really became even more clear to me because a number of years ago, I went down to Driggs, Idaho, where one of our panelists is from tonight, for their first crane festival. It's actually a very charming annual festival. I highly recommend it. And at that festival, I learned that all our cranes from Bozeman area, and in fact from all over the Rocky Mountains, they fly down to the Teton Valley in Driggs, Idaho, and they spend a month or two there fattening up before they go south for the winter, because there are agricultural fields there where they can go eat some grain, and then at night there is a huge wetland area there where they can feel safe and they can roost at night. But just like here in Bozeman, they're also having a lot of pressure from a lot of development, and they're worried about losing all that crucial habitat for our cranes and other birds. So they've been working hard to protect that, and as we are doing here. So this is one of the many reasons that I am so excited to have this talk with Todd and our panelists here. And I'm also thrilled that we have a very full auditorium here with all of you joining us in person. And I want to give a big shout out to all of you joining us online. We had hundreds sign up from all over Montana and all over the country, in fact. So, hooray. I guess I should introduce myself now. I'm Ann Reddy. I'm the chair of the Gallatin Valley Earth Day Committee. Yep, it's working. As I mentioned, we're so excited to have Todd and our panelists with us tonight because this is part of our Wild Talk series based on this year's theme of living with the land. And we started in January with our series, and we've been running talks every month that have covered wetlands and beavers, grasslands, regenerative agriculture. We had an indigenous perspective on land, and then this is our last talk tonight, which is addressing saving wildlife from urban sprawl. So if you missed any of those, don't worry. You can go to our website and click on the button to go to our YouTube channel, and all the talks that were recorded are there. So you go to www.gallatinvalleyearthday.org. So before I invite Todd up here, I promise in just a minute, I just have to thank all our sponsors. This whole series of talks and is free, and it only happens because of the very generous support we have from the businesses and organizations in our community. So I wanted to thank our fiscal sponsor who handles our money, which is Greater Gallatin United Way, our premier sponsors that have sponsored the whole series, Yellowstonian, which is a new online publication that you should check out at Yellowstonian. VW, or Volkswagen of Bozeman, Gallatin Subaru, and then our benefactor sponsors, Bozeman Greenbuild, our local radio station, KGVM, our stewards, American Prairie, Bridger Bowl Ski Area, and Montana Parent Magazine. And then, of course, we have tons of volunteers, some of them are in the audience here tonight, who help make these events happen. And then last but not least, I really want to thank all our partners for tonight's event who helped financially and are on our panel discussion. Yellowstonian with Todd Wilkinson, Friends of Park County, Gallatin Valley Land Trust, Gallatin Wildlife Association, Numbers USA, and the Center for Large Landscape Conservation. Okay, and now on to tonight's talk and panel discussion. Todd Wilkinson will start off the evening with a short talk, and then he will be our MC for our panel discussion after that. And then after and during the panel discussion, there will be a Q&A session going on. If you want to ask a question, if you're in the audience here, I will have a microphone, so just raise your hand so I can bring the microphone to you. That way people who are joining us online can hear your question. And then if you're online, just look on your computer screen. At the bottom, there is a Q&A. You click on that, a box pops up, type in your question, then Rich, our tech person, will read your question to our panelists. Okay, now I promise I will introduce Todd Wilkinson. Todd Wilkinson is based in Bozeman. He has been a journalist for 40 years. His work has appeared in a lot of national publications, such as National Geographic and The Guardian. He is also the author of several great books, award-winning books, in fact. One is about Ted Turner and his great efforts for conservation, very good book. And there's another one about the Jackson Hole Grizzly 399. He is the founder of Yellowstonian. Yellowstonian.org is where you can find that online. It is a nonprofit conservation journalism site that is devoted to exploring the wonders and threats to the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Todd is also the author of a new 2025 edition of his award-winning book, Ripple Effects: How to Save Yellowstone and America's Most Iconic Wildlife Ecosystem. And then most recently, he wrote a foreword to a new unprecedented scientific analysis on the consequences of sprawl on Greater Yellowstone. And you can find this and view it at yellowstonesprawl.com. So now if you just please join me in a round of applause to welcome Todd Wilkinson to the stage.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you all, too, who are tuning in from all over the country. It really speaks to the iconography of this place. Before I continue, I just want to acknowledge some people here, and if you could hold off until the end, that would be great. So first of all, I really want to thank Ann Reddy, who is a rock star with putting together this series through Gallatin Valley Earth Day. It really is extraordinary, the diversity of speakers. Secondly, Rich Reddy, who is her husband and the tech guy who saves us all from panicking at events like this. Next, I'd like to thank Lori Riker, who is the founder of Artemis Institute, the nonprofit parent entity of Yellowstonian.org. And I'd also like to thank Gallatin Valley-based nature photographer Holly Pipple for the breathtaking selection of imagery and videos that you saw here. We'll also be sharing that at Yellowstonian in the coming days. I want to thank our panelists for being here. It's easy to be a journalist when you surround yourself with smart people. My job is to not screw up great material. And finally, you know, in these times, let's hear it for the Museum of the Rockies and MSU, a land-grant institution. All of these entities deserve our praise, so let's give them a round. So again, people are tuning in from across the country. Yellowstone ranks as a destination that a lot of people in this country and a lot of people in the world rank as something that they want to visit in their lifetime. There is a saying, to whom much is given, much is expected. You can find that in Luke, in the Bible, but there's something similar present in almost any holy book. It means that those who are blessed with more, whether in terms of talents, wealth, knowledge, or opportunities, are held to a higher standard of responsibility and accountability. We forget this. We're blessed to live in a region that has wildlife abundance, but it was given to us because of selfless decisions made by earlier generations, both those who came to this continent and, of course, those who inhabited this continent before Europeans arrived. But one of the biggest were those who were willing to impose limits in order to create a better public good. They imagined a future we are now residing in after generations before them, based upon the plunder of the natural world. How will we be remembered? Will it be of relentless me-firstism, or will we pass it on? The only way to do that is to prevent its dewilding. So what I'd like to do is give you all a kind of a crash course in Greater Yellowstone and what's at stake, and perhaps enlighten people who are tuning in. So tonight there's the title of this, but what I really want to talk about and what our panelists will talk about is hope that's based on reality, not willful or wishful thinking, not being passive, not being complacent, and certainly not being cynical. Let me ask a question of you before we begin. How many of you think, or how many of you out there are concerned about growth issues in the Gallatin Valley? Raise your hand. Exactly. The fact that you would all turn out to talk about something like growth issues and not charismatic megafauna, it's really a testament to the fact that you get the bigger picture. So at Yellowstonian, again, I've been a journalist for 40 years. There's a thing in journalism called both sidesism, in which you present different opinions, but of course not all opinions are equal. At Yellowstonian, what we try to do is present the truth based on verified fact. And here we are in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. This is an amazing place. It covers 3 states, about 24 million acres, 2 national parks, 3 national wildlife refuges, 5 consolidated national forests. It is the last of its kind in the lower 48 for a number of reasons. So for those of you who are tuning in, this is Greater Yellowstone. It spans Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. Many of you are going to make pilgrimages there, but what is this place about and why does it belong to all of us? So if you look at this great photo by Holly Pipple of the Gallatin Valley, one could draw the impression that this is like the perfect expression of coexistence. But we all know, those of us who have watched the steady creep of homes, that it doesn't stop there. The real perspective is that elk and other wildlife have been on the landscape for tens of millennia, if not longer, here. And in addition to land acknowledgments for indigenous people, I think we should start having land acknowledgments for species that have been on the landscape in our backyard and remember them, species that evolved here and adapted here. This is an elk herd. And it causes me to ask the question, at current trends, what will the GYE or the natural character of your community, if you're tuning in from elsewhere, what will it look like in just 20 years? Think about where we were 20 years ago in Greater Yellowstone, or think about where you were in another place and why you decided to move here. Why was it? What are we fleeing from? Why is this place considered extraordinary? And if you think about the trends that have happened just in the last decade, what is this place going to look like? How many of you think, from a natural perspective, given current trends, that this place will be better? For those of you at home, nobody raised their hand. So the challenge, if we're going to be adult and if we're going to be honest, is how do we step back into this time, ponder the future, and how do we change it? The same kind of thing existed in 1870 when bison were almost exterminated and people stepped forward to create Yellowstone National Park. They did something about it. So what sets this place apart? We have all of the original fauna that were here in 1491, the year before Europeans arrived on the continent. This is the only place, and the reason that it's set apart is because all these animals are free-ranging and they can migrate either terrestrially or by air. All animals move, we all move. But this is extraordinary, and with wolves brought back 30 years ago, it completed the picture. This is really special that we get to be here, but often we take it for granted. Greater Yellowstone isn't special because of its skiing or its fishing or its hiking or its mountain biking or even its scenery. There are a lot of beautiful places in the world, but they're largely uninhabited or vacant with their native fauna. So again, we have all of the native species that were here, and it's a miracle. The fact that we were able to rewild Greater Yellowstone is owed to conservation efforts and environmental laws and courageous citizens who were not, who were selfless. But also we had a low population, we were geographically isolated, and we had lots of agrarians on the landscape. It's a miracle. But this all has changed. Most of those variables have been taken away, including our remoteness. 2 million enplanements at Gallatin Field last year. 2 million. 500,000 in Jackson Hole. It's a lot of people moving in. So what sets this place apart? It's not just having the critters, but it's the fact that they move. This is a map created by the Wyoming Migration Initiative. It revolutionized the way we think about this place. This is just elk. Elk converge upon Yellowstone, different herds in the springtime, and moms give birth to calves. And then when the snow starts to fly, they move out again on those same ancient pathways. And the reason it exists is because the landscape is unfragmented. If you want to know why wildlife populations and migrations disappear elsewhere, it's owed to fragmentation. So prominent conservation biologists have said this is akin to the landscape breathing in biomass, breathing in elk, and then exhaling it again. But here's something that's really cool. But first, a question. Why don't we treat our ancient terrestrial wildlife corridors with the same level of sacred reverence that we offer to wild rivers? They've been on the landscape as long as rivers have. Why don't we do that? Why do we allow private property owners to destroy something that's been on the land for 10,000 years? Something that supports public wildlife being managed in the public trust. What I like to do as a journalist is present ideas and images that you can't unthink. So consider yourself just caught. So this is what's really cool. This is a map. All of the different colors are of different species that migrate. The unfortunate thing is that there are some entities in Montana that do not want those things mapped in Montana, but they are as prolific and present as they are in the other states. Why those entities refrain from that, I don't know, but it's a shame. But this is really cool. So you look at Bozeman, Montana up here. Big Sky is right there. It's a place where there used to be a lively elk herd. It's gone largely. But all these critters move on the land, and you're going to be hearing from some people who study them tonight. So again, what is it that sets this region apart? Why do we still have this happening on the landscape? Why has it disappeared from the Wasatch? Why has it disappeared from the Front Range of the Colorado Rockies? Why has it disappeared from the mountains of Southern California? Why has it gone from the Sierras and most of the Cascades? Why has it gone from the Appalachians? Why is that? I don't need to tell you. You all know. And the question is, are we going to let Greater Yellowstone go down? So we cannot rewild a suburb to the caliber of world-class wildness that existed before the bulldozers arrived. So this is South Bozeman. We've seen it before. If your head isn't spinning by the growth that's happening here, it should be. But this, with all due respect to people from Iowa or Paducah, you know, we're not in Paducah. Bozeman, Montana, one of the IT cities in the West, one of the fastest growing micropolitan areas in the West. People are moving here. A lot of people are moving here, and they don't have ecological awareness. To whom much is given, much is expected. And I would assert that if you have the audacity to want to move and live the dream life here, you need to educate yourself. We all need to do this, and we're all ambassadors. So here's a story I wrote. It's based on this report. There are hard copies out there. I would encourage you all to pick it up unless you're afraid of reading something that you can't unthink. But Numbers USA, we have a person from Numbers who will be speaking about this. But subdivisions, they're as impactful to wildlife over time as clear-cuts, mines, and energy combined. Moreover, some of you have heard of the Black Butte mine along the Smith River. That has been rigorously examined, but we don't submit subdivisions to the same kind of review. Why is that? They're more prolific, they're taking more habitat off the map, but we don't. We just turned a blind eye. And if we pull in a little closer, we can see how this incrementalism, it destroys things. Again, something that is as priceless as the wildlife of Greater Yellowstone. Are we going to be the ones that squander it? And what will people be thinking looking back at us? Will we be good ancestors in 40 years? So sprawl on private land is the single greatest immediate threat, bringing permanent negative impacts to wildlife and the health of public lands. And that's because private land is located in these critical interstitial spaces between public lands, low ground that animals go to as winter range when the snow starts to fly. They're in river valleys, riparian areas. Those areas that gird rivers are the most important habitat on a landscape, and they're going to become even more so as things get hotter and drier. So this is a map that was, or a graphic that was put together by Leon Kolankowicz, who authored that sprawl study. Leon, just for the record, has done over 100 NEPA analyses on proposed major actions on public land. And he thinks that similarly we should be subjecting major developments because of their cumulative effects to subdivisions. Indeed, there are subdivision regulations that were put on the books in our 3 states by the game and fish or fish and game entities along with conservation partners, but seldom are they considered when subdivisions are approved. So the other thing is taxpayers are footing the bill for exurban sprawl. Everyone is paying in the form of traffic, loss of wildlife, and beloved pastoral open space. What this means is that we are subsidizing the profits of developers. I don't have anything against developers. I think we're all in favor of smart growth. What we're opposed to is dumb growth and having the indignity of having to subsidize the very kind of destruction that we don't want to have happen in our community. But why don't we have a ledger book that considers the costs on nature? So what happens when you lose an elk migration, for example? So in 2017, I sat down with one of the panelists, Randy Carpenter, and we talked about population projections based upon a 3% growth rate. So demographers and even investment people, they use the rule of 72 where you divide a growth rate into 72, and it tells you the amount of time that it will take for that numeric figure to double. 2017, what's important about 2017? It was a couple years before the arrival of COVID. When this map appeared, there was incredulousness and denial that came from the real estate and development community saying, oh, you're exaggerating things. So what this is that it would take, based on a 3 or 4% growth rate, for Bozeman to double to Salt Lake City size proper. Remember, proper, not the entire Wasatch Front, but a city of about 250,000 people. And then if it doubles again in the mid 2060s, we will be Minneapolis proper size, which is about 420,000 people. People laughed at this, ha, ha, ha. The problem is that when COVID arrived, we actually exploded and started to grow for 4 or 5%. But even the population estimates are misleading. And the reason they're misleading is it isn't only the number of humans who are moving permanently to an area, but in a place like Park County, neighboring, there were more homes being built on the landscape than there were a rise in population. That's because it's seasonals building their vacation homes there. So dwellings that might be inhabited for only weeks or maybe a couple of months out of the year are still creating this ecological footprint. And the inhabitants are still demanding that costs of services be provided. So this was the projection. Randy will talk about this when he gives his remarks. And I want to talk about the southern end of the ecosystem for those of you who are tuning in, but I'll get to that in a second. So the other thing is outdoor recreation does not equate to wildlife conservation. It does not. There is no data, none, that suggests when you grant access and you abide industrial strength outdoor recreation, that recreation users will, upon learning the science of impacts to wildlife, that they'll voluntarily restrict themselves. And we have outdoor recreation that is now being fueled by billions of dollars in new investment from the Biden and Trump administration. And in fact, some of that legislation is coming replete with the ability of local forest supervisors to invoke categorical exclusions so you don't assess the impacts on wildlife. In fact, there has never been a cumulative effects analysis both on the impacts of sprawl on Greater Yellowstone nor with industrial strength recreation. And yet one of the things we tell ourselves over and over again is that recreation equals conservation. Well, what kind of conservation is it in the most iconic wildlife ecosystem in the lower 48 states and one in America if conservation itself does not equate to wildlife conservation? So we tell ourselves, we're all here because we all like to recreate. This is an example, Big Sky, Montana, of where the public land issues, sprawl, and recreation meet. I don't think anyone with a straight face could say that there haven't been profound spillover effects from Big Sky. We have roadkill on 191. We have species that have been extirpated from Big Sky proper. We have spillover effects onto public lands. We have forces in Big Sky that have tried to push to have less wilderness land created out of the wilderness study area in that Gallatin Range across the road. The Gallatin Range, if it were picked up as a mountain range and dropped in any other state, it would be instantly the wildest mountain range or the wildest track in 45 of the 48 states because of the diversity of wildlife there. This isn't just a backyard issue. The Gallatin Range is like our ANWR of what ANWR is to Alaska. And so there has never been an ecological cumulative effects analysis undertaken in Big Sky. And if it were a mine, do you think it would be opposed for the pollution problems in the Gallatin and other ESA issues? I think there would be. So this is another thing where we're living and building. Half of the U.S. Forest Service's budget has been spent defending private homes built on private property in the wildland-urban interface. So that over the last couple of decades is tens of billions of dollars. This is the southern part of the ecosystem, or that's northern part. But if we want to protect this, how do we do it in the face of this? How do we do it? Is it inevitable? If it is inevitable, then I want to close up Yellowstonian down tomorrow and I'll do something else. I'll have fun, be a fun hog for the rest of my life. But I think that this is worth fighting for, but it's really going to require that we ask tough questions and that we support elected officials who are making tough decisions. So this is the southern part of the ecosystem, the better mapped. This is all of the species, at least the major ungulates and their movement. What's really cool about this was explained to me that this is really like an electrical system. It's a movement of biomass, and biomass moves with the grass eaters who gather energy from the grass that comes from soils, and then you convert sunlight into energy, and they move and they transport energy and they die, and they're recycled into the soil, or they're eaten by predators or eaten by scavengers, and this thing goes on. You can't put something like this back together again once it's destroyed. We are the only place with this kind of biomass electrical grid. It is a miracle, and it's because our lands are unfragmented. So how do you do it in the face of this? So when this map came out, people said, ha, 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 that's not we'll see a Salt Lake City population in 2060. Well, guess what? There's already a Salt Lake City-sized population of 220,000 people if you play tic-tac-toe between those points. The question facing people in the southern part of the ecosystem is what happens when that doubles? We already have, and we have Cindy Regal, who is an former elected official from Teton Valley, Idaho, dealing with the spillover effects from Jackson, but we already have spillover effects in Star Valley and down along the Wind River Range, and Idaho. Our Island Park, Idaho has 18,000 homes in Island Park, Idaho, most of them that are in the WUI. So if you're an elk moving out of the west side of Yellowstone and you're moving through that headed for Winter Range, think of what you're facing. So again, does this matter? Are we willing to do something about it to protect it? Because if we continue what we're doing is kind of sleepwalking through the growth issues and treating them as inevitable, I can guarantee you we're going to lose most of the function for these animals, and Yellowstone itself is not big enough to support these animals. We know that, and it was identified in a report from William Newmark in 1986. So the question is failing to plan planning to fail? Any good business has a business plan. Why don't we have an ecology plan for the greatest ecosystem that we tout? But there is no unified plan. And where the action is in the 20 counties that comprise Greater Yellowstone. That's where all the land use decisions are made, in addition to the 50 towns, cities, and municipalities. So I want to say one thing to set up Deb Davidson with the Center for Large Landscape Conservation. They are doing brilliant work with the engineering of overpasses, but just as the conceit that recreation equals wildlife conservation, which is false, what happens when you fail to plan? Well, this is the Annenberg Wildlife Crossing across at least 8 lanes of traffic in Southern California, built for originally a price tag of $80 million. It's pushing $90 million now. And this is largely to facilitate the movement of about a half dozen mountain lions and other lesser, smaller critters. So what happens when you don't plan? If you want to ensure ecological connectivity, the price tag goes way up. It's better to protect, far cheaper, and more effective to plan in advance and avoid having to build something like this. And remember what we have for biodiversity. So wildlife overpasses and underpasses are not quick fixes for lack of land use planning that does not prioritize protecting wildlife. So what do I mean by that? This is a wildlife overpass in Washington State. If you're not protecting land here and there, you are building expensive bridges to nowhere. So the Center for Large Landscape Conservation is doing miracle work, particularly in areas and pinch points that wildlife need. And in some places, it's a last resort to prevent total ecological disaster. But they can't be miracle workers unless we have land use planning and zoning. You can't protect corridors. So again, to protect a migration corridor, quality habitat must be protected on both sides of a highway and all the way along the migration route, or you're not going to have mule deer as they are in Wyoming migrating 450 miles round trip, or elk traveling hundreds of miles, or pronghorn traveling 100 miles in the Gallatin Valley and about that distance between Grand Teton National Park and the Upper Green River. You're just not going to have that. So again, this is what we have. This is a sign of what we have. What we're trying to do is foster better discussions, move through denial, and get at better solutions. But the urgency has never been greater. So where does hope reside? For us, it resides. It's possible when smart, passionate, visionary, dedicated, courageous, non-cynical people apply truth and facts to solve wicked problems. What we have to do is do something that's never been done in the lower 48, and that is protect an ecosystem and do it with a focus on private lands. So the upshot is this. We've already done this before. Radical action called Yellowstone National Park, set aside in 1872 over opposition from the territorial legislature and a newspaper in Bozeman who predicted calamity. Grand Teton National Park, the boundaries were expanded over the objections of the first sagebrush rebels and who predicted economic calamity. Those two parks today are worth $1 billion in economic activity just for the region adjacent to them, 15,000 jobs. And guess what two of the marquee attractions are? Wolf and bear watching. So animals drive the economy. We just can't mess it up. So the last thing that I want to say is this. So what's the answer? What if we've been approaching planning and zoning backwards? What if we planned our landscape the same way that we do in thinking about rivers? What if we started with protecting the corridors, these lifeways, and then we adapted to that? Instead of forcing wildlife to adapt to our voracious approach to the built environment, think about that. This is, in fact, is the only way that we're going to save this place. So wildlife has given us a blueprint for hope of how we can do this thing. The only thing is, do we have the will? So thank you for being here. And it's my great pleasure. I'm going to introduce our 5 panelists, and then we're going to open it up to questions from all of you. So the first panelist is Eric Ruark. Eric is has flown in here visiting Greater Yellowstone. He's been here chaperoned by Rob Harding, who helped put that study together on sprawl. Eric is a national expert on how lifestyle migration from one part of the country to another, i.e. folks of means choosing a place for lifestyle decisions, and how it results in bigger sprawl impacts. Eric is the Director of Research and Sustainability and Director of Public Relations for Numbers USA. He has worked on immigration policy since 2008. He has a BA and an MA in history from Virginia Commonwealth University and completed his comprehensive PhD exams in 20th century European history with a concentration in the history of science, technology, and the environment at the University of Maryland. Eric has researched and published extensively on U.S. immigration policy, and his work has been cited in national and international media reports. He also has been called to testify before the Senate Eric understands the importance of maintaining healthy ecosystems and the problems that happen when they unravel. He grew up along Chesapeake Bay, another bioregion of note. Let's hear it for Eric Ruark.
Good evening. Thank you, Todd. And I want to thank everyone who helped put this event on tonight. I sincerely mean it when I say it's my great pleasure to be here speaking with you tonight. So, Rupert Cutler Rupert Cutler said, "Asphalt is the land's last crop." My colleague Leon Kalenkowicz likes to reference this all the time. And Leon, as Todd noted, is really the driving force behind these sprawl studies, which we've been doing for 25 years. We have done 15 full studies and 4 smaller reports. And the latest one is, as you can see there on the left, the Greater Yellowstone. And I want to also acknowledge Rob Harding, my colleague, who is here tonight in the audience, who suggested that we do this particular study. It's the reason I'm here speaking with you tonight. So asphalt is the land's last crop is a great quote because it really encapsulates the harsh reality of urban sprawl. Because once you pave over open space, it's almost impossible to revert that back to its previous state. But the quote that I really I'm drawn to is one by Robert Pyle, and it is, make no mistake, the weeds will win. Nature bats last. So we have the science. We have over 200 pages of data and charts and graphs, all the evidence of how sprawl is affecting the greater Yellowstone. We know what's going to happen if current trends persist. And of course, nature will bat last, no doubt, but us humans can do a whole lot of damage in the top of the ninth. And so when it's all done, well, the only thing left to us to wonder over are the weeds that are growing out of the asphalt that we have laid down. And here I want to note that Todd stole my slide. But it's powerful enough to look at it again. And so, are we to serve as stewards of the land, or at the very least not to destroy it? I don't think that's too much to ask of ourselves. So yesterday I toured the Madison and the Gallatin valleys, and it is amazing. These are amazing places. The Greater Yellowstone is absolutely phenomenal. I understand why people want to move here. I don't want to move here. I'm from the Eastern Shore of Maryland. That's where I'm from. That's where I want to be. Salisbury, Maryland, Hebron to be precise. It's in the Bible. You can look it up. But those places, they don't exist for me anymore. They've been consumed by sprawl. They have disappeared for all intents and purposes. So many of you have seen this picture that's on the left. It's a giant pile of bison skulls. And when many of you think of Maryland, you probably think of the blue crab. But really, I would say the most important, at least for the Chesapeake Bay, is the oyster, the eastern oyster. And Todd has referenced how wildlife migration is like lungs. These migrations, they breathe life into the landscape. Well, the oyster literally breathes life into the waters of the Chesapeake Bay. And as you can see, the bottom right, that's a mountain of oyster shells. And we did our best to rip the life out of the bay. And the only thing that has saved the oysters, at least for now, is putting limitations on human behavior. The population of the Chesapeake Bay increased 10 million, by 10 million people in my lifetime, by 10 million people. The population density in the Chesapeake Bay watershed is 3 times the national average. So we're doing it the right way. We're stacking people, we're packing people in, we're stacking them like chickens in battery cages. But people are still moving to the area, and we're still rapidly losing critical areas of habitat. So according to the sprawl study, the Greater Yellowstone Sprawl Study, in the 20 counties of the Greater Yellowstone, and it's comprising 3 states, from 1982 to 2017, and that's the most recent data we have, we've seen a lot more growth in this area since 2017. But in that period, the population in the 20 Greater Yellowstone counties grew by 58%. 238 square miles were lost to sprawl. And 67% of that loss was due to population growth. 33% was due to increased per capita land consumption. The aggregate population of the Greater Yellowstone counties by 2060 is projected to grow by 40% more than it is currently. Do the residents of the Greater Yellowstone, well, I think you know the answer, but if anyone thinks that's a good thing, you can raise your hand. Do residents of the Greater Yellowstone believe that this is a good thing to grow by 40% more? So for all of the sprawl studies that we've done since 2016, we've conducted public opinion surveys by Rasmussen, which has proven to be a very accurate political polling firm. And so we see 68% of residents in the Greater Yellowstone want more restrictions on development. We also ask about immigration, which is the driver of overall total U.S. population. 59% want to reduce immigration levels, which legal levels right now are about 1.1 million a year. Now, most of the migration that's coming into the Greater Yellowstone area is not international migration. It's secondary or internal migration of people who are moving from other places within the United States to the Greater Yellowstone. One of the big drivers of this growth is what we will call lifestyle migrants. These migrants are usually upwardly mobile and are coming here not for jobs necessarily, but because this is a great place to live, in their opinion, and I would agree with them. But this creates hostilities between those migrants, the come-heres, and the locals. That's an inevitable result of rapid population growth in an area. It's how we as humans operate. It's unavoidable. And just as we know that urban sprawl kills habitats, destroys habitats, rapid growth kills communities. And community has to have some meaning other than just applying it to a random group of people. And having cohesive community action is necessary to saving the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Everyone knows and loves Yellowstone across this country, but most Americans don't know the challenges that the Greater Yellowstone area is facing. Unchecked growth isn't inevitable. It's a choice that Americans have to make, but most especially the people who live in this area have to decide how you're going to tackle it. It is a choice. Unfortunately, at this point, it's probably a choice that's being made by the 17% in that opinion poll. But the rest of you don't have to passively accept it. If this growth continues, if current trends persist, the beauty and the majesty that draw people to the Greater Yellowstone will in large measure cease to exist. I wouldn't advise that. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Eric. Next up is Chet Work, who is a veteran in the private land protection world, and he does an incredible job. Like all of the other panelists, I have a profound level of respect for him. He's the executive director for Gallatin Valley Land Trust. He's spent the last 25 years working in conservation, a majority of that time within Greater Yellowstone. Chet has served in leadership roles for the Nature Conservancy and the Teton Regional Land Trust in Driggs, Idaho, prior to joining GVLT. He's been with GVLT for the last 5 years and has grown the organization's ability to help local landowners conserve their land and to help our community acquire parks and trails. Critical growth for GVLT has been the opening of an office in Livingston, Montana, and increasing GVLT's ability to leverage federal funding for local conservation. It's a great honor to have Chet here as a panelist, and he's going to share his thoughts on what some of the challenges are. Welcome, Chet Work.
Good evening, everyone. I guess I should be near the microphone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to Gallatin Valley Earth Day and Ann so much for putting this together. Thank you, Todd, for the introduction. I think I could talk for hours given the conversation that's happening, but they give me 5 minutes to do my intro here, so I'm gonna try and stick to that. It's certainly a pleasure to join this conversation, and it certainly revolves around my life's work. I'm so fortunate to be part of what I consider to be one of the strongest conservation groups in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Many of you know GVLT as an organization that builds and enhances, maintains local trails. I saw that image you put of a trail up there, Todd. We do so in partnership with the city of Bozeman, Gallatin County, and a passel of other nonprofit organizations. Since our founding in 1990, we've collaborated with these partners to create the world-class Main Street to the Mountains trail system, of which we're very proud. That trail system now encompasses about 100 miles of trails that intertwine in our community. It continues to grow. It connects our neighbors to their neighbors. It connects our neighbors to the landscapes that surround Bozeman. More than anything, I think it connects us as individuals to our peers in this community, and we love the trails for building community. What you may not know is that GVLT also partners with private landowners across 3 counties in southwest Montana to help them and their families keep their working farms and ranches in agriculture, and thereby protecting critical wildlife habitat, migration corridors, and scenic open space in the Gallatin Valley. I'm not advancing my slides very well. There's a nice trail. In the past 35 years, GVLT and the landowner partners we work with, they number now more than 130 agricultural families across Gallatin Park and Madison counties. We have protected 72,000 acres with those families, and of that we're very proud. One of the more frightening statistics that you may hear tonight, and we've already heard a good number of those, and one that I like to repeat, is that in the first 30 years of GVLT's existence, we're very proud to have protected 50,000 acres in southwest Montana. That's a real feat. It's sobering to think that in the same time period in Gallatin County alone, more than 100,000 acres were subdivided or developed or both. We think about this at GVLT when we talk amongst our staff, that the developers are going twice as fast as we are. We've done 50,000 acres, they've done 100. How are we going to accelerate the pace of our work? And it's a driving force for our board and staff to do so. We understand the urgency, and we need to increase the pace of our work. And GVLT is celebrating 35 years. So what's amazing to me, and you may be doing the math in your head, is that in the last 4 years, we've protected 23,000 additional acres. We are trying to triple or quadruple the pace that we are working at. We have tens of thousands of acres of willing and interested landowners in the pipeline that we continue to protect. We are doing what I could say is our best, and we acknowledge that we have a limited impact. We protect these properties one landowner at a time, and we can only work with those that are willing. I will remind you, though, that we have more interested landowners than we can handle right now. I once met with a developer here in Bozeman who suggested that there was $2 billion worth of investment capital coming into Gallatin Valley every year for real estate development. I will suggest, and I probably am in line with my fellow panelists, the GVLT budget is 0.2% of that funding source. And the joke was that we're in a gunfight. We don't have a gun, we have a knife. And by the way, it's a butter knife. It's not even sharp enough to hurt somebody. And so here's sort of my thoughts. I'll keep advancing the slides because they are beautiful and they show amazing people. We are focusing very clearly on priority landscapes around Park County, Gallatin County, and Madison County. If you want to know where we're looking to conserve land, it's along the water courses. It's against the Forest Service boundaries. It's along the East Gallatin, Gooch Hill, Amsterdam and Churchill communities. It's Bozeman Pass. It's the Paradise Valley. It's the Shields Valley. It's Three Forks. These landscapes possess that habitat. And if we can find landowners in those landscapes to work with us, we're really grateful. I have had the great fortune in my career, as Todd mentioned, to work throughout the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. I've done conservation in Pinedale and Jackson Hole in Wyoming. I lived for 15 years in the Teton Valley of Idaho and got the pleasure of trying to protect Island Park. We've heard these names today. And now I have this amazing job working in Southwest Montana. Over the course of that career, I have seen many municipalities just like this that are struggling with the balance between regulatory mechanisms for conservation and incentive-based mechanisms like the conservation easements that land trusts use. I've seen many municipalities engage in the same conversation we're having tonight. I can say unequivocally that land trusts cannot solve this problem alone. Our tool is precise. Our tool is a scalpel. This is a time for maybe other tools that have a bigger brush. We cannot replace zoning, but land trusts are a big part of the solution. And I speak on behalf of my partners in land trusts in Idaho and Wyoming that are doing this same great work on all sides. The Mountain West is a region in transition, and that transition raises conflict, as my predecessor suggested. Newcomers versus old timers, community needs versus private property rights, sprawl versus density, and as Todd mentioned, recreation versus habitat. In order to find solutions, I believe we need not only understand the breadth of the perspectives on the issues, but we need to embrace those opposite perspectives. I have the pleasure of working with a lot of agricultural families in my career, and I can say that I've never met an agricultural family that wanted to see their property developed or their neighbor's property developed. Nor have I met a lot of landowners who want to give up the equity that their property is now worth and the generational transformation that that equity can form. And I don't believe I've ever met a landowner that had a real interest in telling their neighbor what to do with their private property. These are the balancing elements of what we work with. So in closing, I will emphasize another beautiful picture. I will emphasize that while I believe conservation easements are one of the sharpest tools in the toolbox, they're not a silver bullet to address all the challenges that growth brings. At GVLT, our foot is firmly on the gas to accelerate the pace of conservation here in our three-county region. But if we're going to succeed at conserving and saving the quality of life in the landscapes that we love, we're going to need to develop new tools, partnerships, and collaborations. Thank you.
Let's hear it for land trusts and people who put their land in our conservation easements. Land trusts create heroes. Next up is Cindy Regal. I, again, have profound respect for her. Cindy is a brave Spitfire. She's dedicated her career to integrating science, policy, and political action to achieve conservation results. From reintroducing peregrine falcons on a remote mountain near Lander, Wyoming in the early 1990s, to a 10-year stint as an elected official for Teton County, Idaho, on the west side of the Tetons, Cindy has weathered many storms while working to preserve the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Recently, she served as chair of the Teton County Commission. Cindy's knowledge and experience with local land use planning has inspired her to start a collaborative movement that highlights the critical role local communities, organizations, and elected officials play in safeguarding the natural and cultural heritage of Greater Yellowstone. Let's hear it for Cindy Regal.
This is my inspiring new project. I am hearing that echo. Okay, let's go with it. Okay. I'm the panelist that's going to talk about conservation and politics, local politics. Why? Because that, can't see my notes, that is where some of the most important decisions are being made that will have a lasting impact on the future of this place, its iconic wildlife, and our communities. I know this because I was a county commissioner for Teton County, Idaho, for 10 years. I've been coming to Bozeman for over 30 years, so I've observed all the changes here. I love the story about the sandhill cranes and how they move through both of our regions and use habitat in different ways in those places. There's so many connections between my community and yours. So thank you for having me here. At first, my visits to Bozeman were for outdoor adventures, including annual pilgrimages to the Lamar Valley in the spring. More recently, it has been to watch my kids play in soccer and lacrosse tournaments. And now I come as a mirthful warrior for the future of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and to be with you all here tonight to start that collaboration, because we really do need to work together across all the communities in the region. Our communities are connected in so many ways, including the many conservation organizations that work tirelessly to preserve the wildlife, waterways, and working lands of this region. I'm going to try to get this. Okay. Like Gallatin Valley, Teton Valley is a part of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. When I first arrived in Teton Valley, it was 1995, and I was there to conduct research on great gray owls. It was still a predominantly agricultural community with a solid group of local outdoor enthusiasts, many of whom worked at Grand Targhee Resort. I fell in love with the landscape and the community, and I've raised 3 children there. It has since seen phenomenal growth due to its natural amenities combined with the Zoom boom, which has resulted in a lack of affordable housing, exacerbated by the spillover from Jackson's $1 million home market. Sound familiar? Unlike neighboring Teton County, Wyoming, where only 3% of the land base is privately owned, 33% of the land in Teton County, Idaho is in private ownership. It makes it a lot harder to do the work that we all know needs to be done. As I watched farmland and critical wildlife habitat being developed, I got more and more interested in county government and who was making land use decisions. I served on a citizen committee for the comprehensive plan and was eventually appointed to the Planning and Zoning Commission. So I was that young person who everyone wanted on the boards to get involved in local community planning and land use kind of planning for the future, since I was the future. I'm a little bit older now, but after that work I did, kind of through my own volition, I was targeted by the politically active people in my community as a perfect candidate to run for county commissioner. And I eventually agreed to do that. I won my first race in 2014, and I served for 10 years. Now I'm one of those politically active people, and it's because I know how important that work is to preserve the ecosystem. Here's another lovely development going in my community. This development tells a story, a little bit more about my life. It's in 2000, I worked as a terrestrial ecologist for an environmental consulting firm. We were hired by the developer of Mountainside Village, this development, which is on the south end of Teton Valley. I conducted the field work and made a recommendation that no development occur on the mountain shrub habitat on the hillside in the picture that you're looking at, because it's critical winter range for mule deer. This was in 2000. The developer agreed and submitted a very reasonable master plan with cluster development that was approved by the city of Victor. 25 years and multiple amendments later, this hillside is getting developed. I took this picture just 2 days ago. I believe we are losing ground as conservationists in the GYE because we are not collectively organized or consistently engaged in local politics. From my experience as a county commissioner, I can tell you that the developers are in the front row of local government meetings, often advocating for loosening restrictions and allowing leapfrogging developments out onto the landscape far from city services, at a tremendous cost to local taxpayers, and Todd mentioned that. Okay, local government, hard at work. This is the City of Teutonia Mayor and City Council. This is what it looks like to go into the rooms of our small towns in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. They were actually having a Christmas party, and I was there to talk to them about a major expansion plan that was being proposed at Grand Targhee Resort. And so we were kind of sharing potential impacts and things we were worried about, and they were learning more about a socioeconomic study that the county had participated in funding, just so we get a sense of how the development would impact the county budget and the city budget, that sort of stuff. It is a development in Wyoming. The only way you can get there is through Idaho. If you've ever skied at Grand Targhee, it's also an awesome mountain. So I just wanted to kind of emphasize what it's like going to county meetings and how the presence of people in the room really does make a difference. So this is a Board of County Commissioner meeting in Teton County, Idaho. The room was packed because the county's Wildlife Advisory Committee was on the chopping block. This is a technical committee that has been instrumental in helping the county plan around critical wildlife habitat and movement corridors. Despite the great turnout at this meeting, the committee was suspended. This was the unfortunate result of what happens when we lose local elections to people who don't value long-range planning for the future of our wildlife, waterways, agricultural lands, or quality of life. Local elections are a critical piece of the puzzle for protecting the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Wrapping up here, That's me in our local 4th of July parade. It's so great to be here with you all. If you are not already doing this, I would encourage everyone in the room and on Zoom to start familiarizing yourself with the various ways you can participate in local government decision-making. There are public comment opportunities for a reason. Take advantage of those to reiterate the community and ecosystem values that are important to you. Participating in local elections is also critical as a candidate, volunteer, or donor. And I know you have at least 21 county commissioner here in this room. Jen Bauer, thank you for being here. Such important work. Thank you for serving your community. I'm no longer a county commissioner, but I'm not done with this work. With a new organization that combines conservation and politics, I plan to help communities advocate for a more comprehensive approach to local land use planning that honors this incredible ecosystem and allows wildlife to continue to thrive here. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's hear it for Cindy Regal and for Jennifer Boyer, who's here. So next, we're going to go into some strategy and thinking about the engineering. How do we ensure that wildlife passages can remain viable? And the person that I'm about to introduce works for the Center for Large Landscape Conservation, which has a globally renowned reputation for trying to put landscapes back together again, reducing vehicle collisions that result in human deaths, lots of property damage, and as many of us have seen, the huge roadkill issues on many of our greater Yellowstone highways. As Chief Strategy Officer at the Center for Large Landscape Conservation, Deb Davidson directs program development, fundraising, external relationships, and partnerships to advance the organization's connectivity conservation programs. She's based here in Bozeman. Her work in conservation for more than 20 years has largely focused on the protection of wildlife corridors and large landscape, with a specialty in networks development, connectivity policy, and science in Western North America. The Center for Large Landscape Conservation is a global leader in the new movement to preserve and restore places that, again, have been separated or disconnected. It's a great pleasure to introduce Deb Davidson. Let's give her a welcome.
Hi. There is a feedback loop here. It's fairly disconcerting. Okay, I have the pleasure, as Todd said, of serving on the executive team at CLLC, as we call it. We work across the US and the globe to secure connected and resilient landscapes for healthy communities of people and wildlife. I've never been called a miracle worker before, but I appreciate that, Todd. We like to think of ourselves as an organization that works to either maintain connections that exist or reconnect and stitch back together landscapes. Our team of 25 conservation biologists and policy specialists works with conservation partners, agencies, and decision makers to expand this practice, a very new practice, which we call connectivity conservation. And we firmly believe, and scientific studies have confirmed this, that it really is one of the most important and necessary conservation approaches we could take right now to reduce the impacts of climate change on landscapes. So you guys have already seen this slide. And Todd did a fabulous job of describing it. This slide, I'll just highlight, really captures why connected large landscapes are needed, and why we need to take a large landscape approach to our conservation work. As Todd pointed out, these are elk herds that move outside of the square that we think of, or that is Yellowstone National Park, the 2.2 million acres of amazing wildlife habitat, but not enough to sustain these elk herds. And when we take a large landscape approach, we can think beyond the square, or we also can think beyond one valley. So that's some of the work that we do. We try to have people take a step back and think about the implications of a landscape, of an ecosystem, and how one valley's actions can impact another. So this map is of a grizzly bear on Interstate 90. And when animals leave Yellowstone National Park or beartooths or other protected areas, they encounter a patchwork of public and private lands filled with roads, houses, agriculture, ski areas, and other human development. So this map demonstrates the barrier effect of one of the most significant fragmentation forces on our landscapes. That's roads. And in this case, this is Interstate 90 near Drummond. This grizzly bear, who was collared, which is why we have this fabulous data, attempted 46 times to cross Interstate 90 in the fall of 2020 and the spring of 2021. He finally made it across at attempt 46, and he was incredibly patient and dedicated, but he's also one of the lucky few to be able to make this. Most critters don't make it across Interstate 90 or other roads like 191. So the impacts of roads on human safety, our wildlife, and our biodiversity is profound and is growing across the globe. It's not just here in the GYE, it's across the globe. We are a global organization, and my team of road ecologists work in many corners of the world to help mitigate the impacts of roads on Asian elephants, wild dogs in Zambia, jaguars in Bolivia, and here on wide-ranging species in the Northern Rockies. In the GYE, we've been working to improve connectivity and wildlife migration in the northern valleys specifically, and in the Custer Gallatin National Forest. So the two valleys we've been focusing on with our scientific studies have been the Gallatin Canyon Valley, or the Big Sky, the 191 corridor, and Paradise Valley. A couple of projects we have completed thus far, and we're a super scientific organization, as you're hearing here. We completed an innovative connectivity model for the Custer Gallatin National Forest, which we finished in 2020. It was incorporated into their forest plan, and it guides the National Forest management and decision-making specifically around connectivity conservation within the forest. We've also completed 2 multi-year wildlife and transportation assessments. We worked with the state and federal wildlife agencies on these and Western Transportation Institute. We've completed these assessments, as I was mentioning, along Gallatin Canyon, and US 191, and Paradise Valley and Highway 89. And the work for Highway 89 has been done in conjunction with a group that a few people here are involved with. It's called Yellowstone Safe Passages. And I'll just highlight, we didn't choose those 2 valleys lightly. The reason we chose them is they're 2 of the busiest highways we have in the state, have the highest rate of wildlife vehicle collisions. And they also, as you guys have heard, and that elk map demonstrates, they're crucially important for the overall migration of animals out of Yellowstone in between the mountain ranges. And of course, they're also important for human safety. So the project on US 191, our fine scale assessment, 1/10 of a mile assessment, resulted in identification of 11 priority sites. And these priority sites are areas where high levels of wildlife vehicle collisions were taking place, and they're also important areas to maintain wildlife movement and migration. Our study also included recommended measures. It assessed the feasibility of these measures and then developed recommendations for implementation to improve road safety as well as habitat connectivity for both land and aquatic species along the whole corridor, so all the way from Four Corners to West Yellowstone. Oops, that's not mine. Oh, there's supposed to be a picture of an overpass here. I don't know where it went. That's funny. We'll see if it's, nope. Okay, it's not coming back. So there was supposed to be, imagine you're on 191. north of the mouth of Gallatin, the bridge, where you're going south, so you're south of Gallatin Gateway, you're just north of the bridge, and there's a beautiful wildlife overpass. So our study, we ended up working with Montana Department of Transportation to put together a proposed wildlife overpass, an underpass, and a retrofit of the bridge. So we worked with them and we actually submitted an application to the Wildlife Crossing pilot program this year, Federal Highways program, for the construction funding. We were not successful. We heard in December, which was very disappointing. But we're not deterred. We are ready to file another application with Montana Department of Transportation again, as soon as a grant opportunity opens again. At this moment, considering things within administration, that is on hold, but we are ready to jump as soon as there is an opportunity. I'm sorry you guys couldn't see the beautiful picture. I don't know where it went to. But just imagine an overpass over 191. So I'll wrap up. Thanks for listening to me and my opportunity. I really appreciate having the opportunity to share some of the ways that my team uses science, policy, and partnerships to address habitat fragmentation in the GYE. This is just a drop in the bucket, I know it. And I mean, I know there's a lot more work to be done. And as Todd said, planning and data is so important. And that's why we feel our work at least is helping to identify these high priority areas that still, where either private lands conservation can take place, wildlife mitigation over roadways, or hopefully land use with some of our counties, and work with people like Chet. So thanks so much. And yeah, thanks for being here.
Our final presentation is coming from Randy Carpenter, who is a professional planner, and he's really influenced the way I think as a journalist. Randy specializes in thinking about planning focused at the intersection of human communities and landscapes with exceedingly high ecological values vulnerable to development. He's now executive director of Friends of Park County, a nonprofit organization in Livingston, dedicated to helping Park County and Livingston develop smart, informed land use policies that protect the integrity of wildlife and water resources. Park County is dealing with fearsome spillover effects from Bozeman. Randy's been involved with lots of different entities as a professional planner. He also worked for Future West. It's a great delight to have you hear Randy Carpenter. Let's hear it for him.
So I'm batting cleanup tonight. So I'm going to give one last data point that kind of points to the challenges, that we're facing in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. If the 20 counties of this ecosystem, Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, continue to grow at the rate they have been for the last 20 years, which is about 1.24% a year, Gallatin's growing at 3%. Madison, Idaho is, barely growing at all, but it averages out to 1.24% a year. This, after just 10 years, will develop 35,000 homes. So how do we manage this growth? So two principles here. One is to build in town, and the other one is when subdivisions do get built out in rural areas, that they should be designed with nature in mind. So let's look just real quickly at principle one. So this is so key that we get more growth in our towns, and it just comes down to simple math. And that is that the average density of homes in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, rural homes in subdivisions, is about one home per 5 acres, right? In towns, the average density is one home per 0.25 acres, right? So when you do the math um, on those 35,000 homes, this is what we come up with. So at that rural density, it's 175,000 acres in a decade that would be developed. On the other hand, if all of those homes were developed in our towns, 0.25 acre lots, that would be 8,750 acres that would be developed. Huge difference. Now, it's not going to be all in rural areas. I sure hope it isn't. It's not going to be all in towns. But I guess my point is that the more growth that we can get in town, the higher percentage of our total growth that occurs in town, that's a key to sustainability of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, in my mind. So principle 2, design with nature when there is rural subdivision. So it's really all about design, and I'll get into that here in a little bit. The tools that we have to use are two things. One, subdivision regulations, and the other thing is zoning regulations, okay? Unfortunately, all the counties, all 20 counties in the ecosystem have subdivision regulations, are required to by their state governments. Most of the county subdivision regulations just kind of deal with things like, making sure the platting is done right and the infrastructure is in place. And not so much on the design of subdivisions, the design standards that would mitigate and reduce the impacts on wildlife habitat, agriculture, and water. What Fish and Wildlife, Montana Fish Wildlife came up with was a model subdivision regulation that dealt with that issue of design standards in rural areas, really focusing on winter range areas, protecting native grassland and shrub habitats, selected species of concern, and calling for river setbacks, which is really key. And not a lot of counties have them. We know that rivers and their riparian areas are the key habitat. Somewhere up around 80% of the species in greater Yellowstone ecosystem depend upon riparian areas. We need to protect them. So it's a great document there, a guide for counties to develop design standards in subdivisions. So it's really the fundamental thing is about clustering homes when they're in rural areas. So, what we see here is, typical landscape, right? In the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, we've got some pivot irrigation going on there. We've got a, nice, healthy riparian area, and then, shrublands and native grasslands. So we've all seen this, you fly into Bozeman or wherever, where this is, all of that original area is really divided into lots. So the homes are spread out into large lots. When you cluster subdivisions, you do something like this. So you first identify the areas that you don't want to develop, the irrigated land, and especially those riparian areas and the uplands. And cluster the homes around them into smaller lots so they take up less space of the original. So the other tool we have here is our zoning regulations. Not a lot of counties have a lot of zoning in Montana. I mean, it's just incredible that we don't have counties that just, as a matter of course, decide that it is reasonable to identify where growth can better be managed. It has less of an impact on those things that we cherish both. But not a lot of counties have that. But I do think things are changing. Zoning regulations really deal with three things: density, the density of homes. So how big are the lots? And I will say here that the 5-acre average lot size in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem is not going to cut it, folks. We cannot keep doing that. 5 acres does not allow the permeability for wildlife to move through, right? We need to be looking at zoning regulations that are more like 40-acre lots required, 80 acres, 160-acre lots, right? This is what the science tells us is needed, okay? The other features of zoning can be the type of use, limiting commercial uses outside of town, including resorts, which we're having a real challenge with over in Park County. And then house siting. Zoning regulations can work well in concert with subdivision regulations to make sure that homes are sited away from sensitive areas. A bunch of you are probably thinking, we've heard it all the time. Can't tell a man what to do with his property, right? And my response to that is, when I hear that, is balderdash, right? We do that all the time. We've been doing it for a long time. You can't dump battery acid in the stream running through your property, right? You can't put a septic system right next to a wetlands. The state regulates this stuff. So we determine where the most impacts, the harshest impacts are going to be on the land, and we have some regulations. Zoning is just one of those tools that we have. We sometimes, we think of it as, the Z word, people call it, nobody wants to do that. I don't think that's true. I think things are changing. And when I look at counties like Powell County in Montana, Deer Lodge over there up in the Blackfoot Valley, those folks came together, they're ranchers primarily, and established countywide zoning with a minimum lot size of 160 acres for the vast majority of the county, because they use science well, first they started with the goals. We want this to remain special, agriculture to last, wildlife to thrive here. This is what we need to do. They went ahead and did it. Gallatin County here is moving forward with the same thing, right? Just a smart plan based on science. What do we want to protect? What sort of tools do we need to use? And subdivision regulations and zoning districts are one of those. So don't, when people say you can't do that, we've done it for a long time. This is a tool that I see more and more people coming around to, because the growth pressures have just gotten so much. They're just affecting so much land. It's like, what can we do? Let's look at zoning. So I want to end on a hopeful note here, though. We can do it. Right? We can do it. I really see a change in attitudes out there about, maybe we need some more regulations in addition to what we have, because we want this place to stay special. That's what we're trying to do in Park County, right? So what you see on this graph here is so instructive to me. This is the percentage of homes in a county, Gallatin County, that were built in towns by decade. So in the decade of the 60s, 85% of the homes were built in town. That was a traditional development pattern all over the country and in the West, right? Most of the homes were in town and smattering of farm and ranch homes out in rural areas. Then we got into the 70s, 80s, and that's when we started to see more sprawl and the percentage of homes occurring in town dropping. The 70s and 80s, look, let's face it, that was a decade of the worst hairstyles, the worst car designs, and the worst growth management strategies. But what we have seen, especially since 2010 to 2024 in Gallatin County, almost 80% of homes have occurred in our towns for a variety of reasons, market preferences, land prices, but also because I would argue that Gallatin County is doing a better job of managing growth and working with the cities. So, I think more counties can do this. I think they will. We're working to help Park County do that. And, I think it's important for us to recognize that, this is a big challenge, but this is such an incredible place that we need to work for it. And we need to be hopeful, because I think that's realistic, as Todd was talking about. Thank you.
If I could indulge you just for a few more minutes, we're going to have our panelists come up. If you guys could come up, please, to answer a few questions. As they're coming up, one thing I want to say is, if you want to do something significant, support these groups. They all have tables out there. You can gather information. If you believe in conservation journalism, please consider supporting Yellowstonian.org. But these folk are on the front lines of these issues, and there's no better way to make a difference than supporting entities that reflect your values. So let's hear it for them, and then we're going to go into some questions.
First of all, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for speaking about and overall it's such an important issue, and just want to thank everybody for presenting, and thank you, Todd, for speaking. Thanks, Museum of the Rockies, for putting this on. This is a question I have for Chet and GVLT. Just in light of what Todd was sharing and Deb as well about addressing fragmentation of local herds, and its fragmentation being a threat to critical and sensitive wildlife populations. And we know that GVLT has done great work in the valley, and I just want to acknowledge that and thank them for that. But also, given GVLT's commitment to both trails and conservation, would they be willing to commit to not developing trails in certain areas, sensitive habitats, maybe doing conservation easements instead? And maybe they are doing that. And important wildlife corridors and calving areas in order to protect and maintain the integrity of these corridors. Specifically, I'd like to ask about GVLT's plans to potentially develop a new trail in Bear Canyon, which is a known elk calving ground and established migration corridor. If you have any thoughts on that.
Thank you. Appreciate the question. I've been working in this field for a long time, and I remember in the beginning of my career, conservation included motorized recreation. It was how quickly can we get a big enough tent to actually have some political and community power. I moved to Bozeman 5 years ago, and recreation and wildlife habitat are in a juggernaut. It's been a remarkable change. I think that's due to increased recreation pressure. I think it's due to increased political power around conservation. And it's a difficult landscape to be in. GVLT, I think, as best as any organization, is trying to balance the recreation needs of this community and the ability for this community to get outdoors with the wildlife that we all know and love. And I got into this work primarily from a wildlife perspective, but the ability to build community around recreation is really powerful. You'll see that most of the 100 miles of trails that GVLT has helped to construct have been within the urban boundary or connecting to the larger trails that are out there. We estimate that there's more than 1 million trail uses in Bozeman every year. That's a remarkable number. And any of you who have been using the trails are now finding them much more congested. And there's this distinct demand for the creation of new trails, so much so that there is a lot of what we sort of call unregulated trail creation going on. So GVLT is working really hard to identify landscapes where wildlife populations and the community can absorb increased pressure and to focus recreation there rather than in the places where habitat populations, wildlife, natural resources can't absorb those pressures. We are currently focused on building a mountain bike park on top of a landfill. That seems like a pretty good spot for us to be focusing our recreation energies. The Bear Canyon landscape is one that's sort of fraught. The neighbors in that landscape are very passionate. They understand the wildlife that live there, where we honor that. And it's an area that has been impacted heavily over the years by logging, by recreation, and our data counters continue to show increased recreation on a trail system that isn't even constructed there. And so our hope is that we can find a way to balance that landscape for recreation. I appreciate the concept that managing trails is difficult. We think we can actually build trails and close them during sensitive seasons, and that's going to be something that we lean on the community for. But we are hopeful that we can find a balance. And while we're not pushing forward in the Bear Canyon landscape right now, we may in the future as growth and energy pressures continue to move that direction, as subdivisions move out in that direction, we're trying to find a balance of conservation and recreation.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump in really quick, just because I'm going to add in one of the things I didn't get to talk about in our very short 5 minutes. When I showed that map of priority landscape or priority areas along US 191, or you would have seen a similar map for 89, that doesn't just show you where the wildlife are moving across the road, it also shows you the habitat on either side. And as Todd pointed out when he showed the Santa Monica crossing, you have to ensure that there's protected lands on either side. It could be it could be public lands, it could be private, it could be under conservation easement. And I would just like to say a lot of the work that we're doing in this northern GYE, we share with Chet and his team, so they can help to identify some of their priority landscapes too. So I think that just highlighting that. So their team, I think, is really looking at the needs for wildlife movement in the region for sure, and using some of our maps and others. So.
Thank you. Next question.
Todd, I have 2 questions. Please pick if you'd only want one of them. The first one is, we talked a lot about community tonight, and traditional ecological knowledge is critically important in wildlife conservation, including the GYE. For any of the panelists, is there work with Native American tribes in the work you do? That's question 1. And question 2 might be mostly for Deb, because I appreciated Randy stating about the need for hope. I'm wondering, Deb, with I don't know, the middle of Australia or the Andes or all the places that your group works, do you have anything that we can hold on to as hope of good things that you've seen for the work you've done that relates to the GYE?
So part of that education thing is educating people that the place names of Greater Yellowstone correspond through indigenous cultures, often with wildlife, the places where wildlife were and have been. And I think that's a great way to bring greater appreciation for the fact that there's been this relationship with wildlife that goes back. You know, it's interesting, isn't it, when we name our subdivisions after wildlife and then a year later, those animals no longer inhabit that land. So I think that, you know, we are in this new era of incorporating. There was a speaker here that Anne recruited, Stephen Davis, who gave a talk a week ago that was really powerful. And Stephen said, it's not either or, it's both. And he has been encouraging his friends from the Blackfeet country to come in and get science degrees to work on wildlife and to share indigenous knowledge. So, you know, we're at the forefront of this now, and there's a lot of work to do, but it isn't either or, it's incorporating what we know. You know, the interesting thing about the Wyoming Migration Initiative is that it's corroborated a lot of knowledge that existed among the tribes of this stuff. So I think we're just now, and you know, as far as working with tribes.
No, I read that. I was saying goodbye to my wife. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Why don't you go?
All right, Scott, you asked about hope. I get to travel to some pretty incredible places, and I spent 2 weeks at a convention called the Convention on Biological Diversity in Columbia this year, and that's one point of hope, was that there were, I can't even remember, 30,000 of us who'd come from all over the globe to figure out how can we tackle this crisis. Very few Americans, which is, somewhat noteworthy. It was heading into the next election, but globally, people are leaning in hard. And one concrete example I can give is a project that one of our staffers, Rob Ament, who has been a longtime road ecologist in this community and globally, some of our work has been a lot of our work actually has been in Asia. And he's worked in India for a long time. And there's a huge national park there called Kaziranga National Park. Tigers and Asian elephants still exist in that landscape, as do a lot of people on the outskirts. But major highways running through it, they knew they were going to replace it. It was just like a 2-lane road through the middle of the park. And Rob and others from Western Transportation Institute and the Center for Large Landscape Conservation, and plenty of people in India, the Wildlife Trust of India, worked with the government to get a 40-kilometer flyway, we call it. So it's an elevated road for 40 kilometers through the park. And to think of a country like India, which is not the wealthiest country, but saying that we value Asian elephants and we value tigers, and we actually value our people too, who are hitting these animals, by investing in a 40-kilometer flyway is pretty incredible. And that's just one of many stories. We're seeing those kind of investments. And yeah, it gives me hope.
Thank you. We're going to take a few questions from our online audience before we take another one from here.
Yes, Erica points out that if you try to do something with connectivity and highway overpasses and such, that there are a lot of different agencies and nonprofits and stakeholder groups and landowners that have to be coordinated, the county. Can you talk a little bit about the logistics of actually getting something to happen?
I guess this is for me again. I often say to my staff, and I reflect, I've been working on this topic since the late 90s. And sometimes I think, God, I picked like one of the hardest things in the world to do. I could have just worked on like working with the Forest Service or just working with the National Park Service. Instead, I decided to work on what I like to consider the messy middle, where you have multi-jurisdictions, you have community members, you have pretty much every agency under the sun. That actually is one of our specialties. We're really good at bringing people together and trying to find common ground. And with a project like US 191, we started that project in 2021 and immediately, brought Montana Department of Transportation to the table. Gallatin County, this was actually before Jen, but Jen's been involved. The Park Service, the Fish and Wildlife and Parks. We had a technical advisory committee basically made up of 12 different agencies and entities. And that's how this has worked. We've also worked, that project in particular, seamlessly and daily with the leadership within Big Sky, who was really important. And people like the Turner family. Oh my God, there's my overpass. Someday we'll have that. So yeah, it's a logistical nightmare, but what we do, and this is a lot of the work that I do since I'm a networks practitioner, and I share this a lot with other network leaders, is it just takes time, and you've got to get people to the table, and you have to develop trust and communication. And we feel pretty lucky, even with Montana Department of Transportation, after we've been working with them for over, I'd say, 2 decades, we're at the point where they do trust us, which is why they were willing to put that application in. And they knew that we based it on science. So trust, lots of time together, and just bringing in diverse parties together, I think is really key. But it does take a lot of time. And now a question for someone else.
Okay. Hello. Yeah. Okay, good. We have time for one more question. Sorry, we're just running out of time tonight. So many good questions. So, but take one more.
Hi, this question is for Chet. With the local and federal governments making some sweeping changes constitutionally with federal lands and drilling, logging, the whole bit, how secure do you feel conservation easements are and holding their integrity not to be dissolved or developed?
It's a good question. It's certainly not something I ever thought we'd have to be considering. Conservation easements turned about 65 years old just a few years ago, and they've had a remarkable run of legal stability, and they are contested, you know, constantly by developers and people who think that they can get a piece of property for cheap, and they've been upheld by the courts at an alarmingly high rate, probably well into the 99 point something percentage. And so I feel strong that the current administration will respect a private property rights position on this. We've seen, I think, about 8 laws in the state of Montana proposed this year that are anti-conservation easements or anti-conservation. And we've been really fortunate that they've all been dropped in committee or dropped on the House floor, Senate floor. And I feel like there's a lot of pressure against conservation. There's a lot of pro-development, but conservation easements seem to be holding up. So I'm optimistic, and I'll knock on wood.
Before we go, I'd like to, give a shout out to this guy here, please. And the Yellowstonian, we all know that local journalism is struggling, and we desperately need nonprofits, especially groups like this. Todd, he's the only journalist I know in the country, and we're lucky to have him right here, who gets the essential issues that we are facing and what we need to do. And that has to do with growth on private lands. They're incredibly ecologically important, and he gets it, and it just doesn't seem like any other journalists do. They want to talk about rock and ice and stuff like that, right? This guy gets it. So, he deserves the kudos, and please do support Yellowstonian.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's have our panelists say one thing that you would recommend as a takeaway that people can do, and something that potentially, if they share with their friends and so on, it could make a difference. Let's start with you.
Attend a county commission meeting, planning board meeting. Just try it. See what these folks do, because this is where the real stuff happens, right? And when they only see engineers and developers, et cetera, in the room, that sends a message to them. We need more conservationists in the room, and we need more conservation organizations focusing on private lands. Those are the keys.
Okay, I have 2. Vote. And then the second one is keep an eye out for wildlife on the roads, particularly 89 and 191, all roads, but just keep an eye out and go slower.
The local zoning, attending those, it's essential, and they're boring and people don't want to do it and they don't think it matters, but it absolutely matters. It's crucial to affecting change. One thing, though, that I think is a problem, and I see it all around the country in communities, different places we've done the sprawl studies, is nationalizing local politics. And that's to the benefit of the developers and the people who want sprawl to continue, because they know if they can go in and divide people by nationalizing a local issue, they get the people who are on the same side at each other's throats instead of concentrating on what needs to be. We can have disagreements about all kinds of things, but if we agree about stopping sprawl, we have to work together, no matter who's the president or no matter who's in control in DC, because they want us to be divided. It's to their benefit.
All those are good. You all stole mine. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people in this community who have called up GVLT and said there are orange flags in the hayfield next to where I live. What is going on? And I want to tell you that you're probably 3 to 5 years late by the time those flags show up. Go to the meetings, find out where the subdivision is being proposed. There is not enough excavation equipment in this community for somebody to start turning soil as soon as the county commissioners approve a development. It was years ago. And there are so many people that are frustrated about what's happened 10 years ago because they're just now seeing an excavator in the field next to their house. We need to know what's going on. So I would say go to the meetings. I would say pay attention. And then in line with yours, we're all here because we love this place. Say hi to someone on a trail, pick up your dog poop, and love your neighbor.
I already made my recommendation. It's been echoed by a few people on the panel, but there's something that comes before zoning and subdivision ordinances, and that's comprehensive planning. And that is where the county or the city, whatever municipality you are in, should be updating their comprehensive plans. I think it's Montana, is it a master plan? Growth policy, growth management plan. If they haven't, start a movement to make sure that you're not working from a very old plan that doesn't really emphasize the importance of the ecosystem and the small town, community feel and the agricultural heritage, whatever is important to your community, make sure it's in your plan. And if it's not, insist that a plan be updated to include, the new community. Like 20 years ago, it was very different. So look at those plans and then make sure your elected officials are following those plans. So when you'll see zone changes happening when you look at your agendas for a planning and zoning commission meeting or a county commissioner meeting, you'll see lots of discretionary applications where the county commissioners or the city council members can say no, like they're not required to approve it. But you need to go in there and support your plan and support your elected officials so they feel comfortable saying no. They have backup from the community because of all that pressure coming from the developers to get them to say yes, or to get them to say, oh, approve it with conditions. We'll do all these wonderful things. And, half the time it never gets done because no one's following up because everyone's overworked. So start with the plan, go to the meetings, run for office. If you get super passionate about it, just do it. Start at city council, start at county commissioner, state, whatever, just give it a shot. Thanks.
Thank you all. Thank you to all our wonderful panelists. It's been a really great evening, and I thank you all for being here. I just wanted to thank you too for attending this evening. If you're joining us online, you will receive an email which will provide you with a link to a recording of this event in addition to additional information and more information on how you can help. Whoops, our screen has gone dead. Oh, well. Please join us in Bozeman on Saturday, April 9th. At the fairgrounds to celebrate Earth Day. If you'd like to support the Friends of Highlight and help keep our roads clear in the winter, then you come run in the Earth Day Fun Run 5K. It's at 9 a.m. You can register at www.winddrinkers.org. And also at 9 a.m. At the fairgrounds, the Winter Farmers Market is part of our festival since we're living with the land this year. And at 10 a.m., our annual Gallatin Valley Earth Day Festival starts. And this fun-filled festival includes the City of Bozeman's Cleanup Day. We have talks every hour. We have 50 exhibitors. We have great food. We're selling chili from the food co-op. There's live music and tons of great children's events. So bring your kids, bring your grandkids, because we have a magic show at 10 a.m. We have face painting. We have a petting zoo with little miniature horses and fun games with prizes. So to see the complete schedule and find out more, visit our website at GallatinValleyEarthDay.org. So thank you for coming.